The Musgrave Ritual. An unusual thing about my friend Sherlock Holmes was that, although he thought very clearly and carefully, and also liked to dress quietly and neatly, he was one of the messiest men I have ever known. This sometimes made living with him very difficult. I am not very strict about order myself. My hard work in Afghanistan and my natural free spirit made me a little careless too, but even I have limits. When I see a man keep his cigars in the coal bucket, his tobacco in the toe of a Persian slipper, and his lettuce stuck with a knife in the middle of the wooden mantelpiece, I start to feel like I am the more tidy person. I have always thought that shooting practice should be done outside, but Holmes, in one of his strange moods, would sit in a chair with his small gun and 100 bullets and shoot at the wall opposite him. He made a patriotic sign VR with the bullet holes. I felt that this did not make our room look better or feel better. Our rooms were always full of chemicals and old things from crimes. These things often ended up in strange places, like the butter dish or even worse spots. But his papers were the biggest problem for me. He hated to throw away papers, especially those from his old cases. Yet only once every year or two did he find the energy to organize them. As I have said in these mixed-up stories, after he used great energy to do his famous work, he would become very lazy. He would lie around with his violin and books, hardly moving except from the sofa to the table. So, month after month, his papers piled up until every corner of the room was full of bundles of papers. These papers could not be burned or put away by anyone but him. One winter night, as we sat by the fire, I asked him if, since he had finished putting extracts in his notebook, he could spend the next 2 hours making our room neater. He agreed it was a fair request. With a sad look, he went to his bedroom and soon came back pulling a big tin box. He put it in the middle of the floor and sat on a stool in front of it. He opened the lid, and I saw it was already 1/3 full of bundles of papers tied with red tape in small packages. "There are many cases here, Watson," he said, looking at me with playful eyes. "I think if you knew all the things I have in this box, you would ask me to take some out instead of putting more in." "Are these your early case records?" I asked. I often wished I had notes on those cases. "Yes, my friend. These were all done before my biographer made me famous." He gently lifted bundle after bundle. "They are not all successes, Watson," he said, "but some are interesting problems. Here is the record of the Tylerton murders, the case of Vanbury, the wine cellar, the story of the old Russian woman, the strange case of the aluminium crutch, and a full account of Ricoletti, who had a club foot, and his horrible wife. And here, this is something special." He put his arm deep in the chest and took out a small wooden box with a sliding lid, like a toy box for children. Inside, he showed me a crumpled paper, an old brass key, a wooden peg with a string ball, and 3 rusty metal discs. "Well, my friend, what do you think of this collection?" he asked, smiling at me. "It is an unusual collection, very unusual, and the story behind it is even more unusual." "These things have a story?" "Yes, they are part of history." "What do you mean by that?" Sherlock Holmes took each item one by one and put them along the edge of the table. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at them with a happy light in his eyes. "These," he said, "are all I have left from the Musgrave ritual case. I heard him talk about this case many times, but I never knew the full story." "I would be very happy," I said, "if you could tell me about it." "And leave the room messy like this?" he asked, smiling. "Your love of order cannot handle much trouble, Watson, but I am happy for you to add this case to your stories because it is very special. It is unique in the criminal history of this country and, I think, in any country. My list of small successes would not be complete without telling about this strange case. You may remember how the case of the Gloria Scott and my talk with the unhappy man, whose story I told you, first made me interested in the profession that became my life's work. Now you see me when my name is well known everywhere. People and the police see me as the last court for difficult cases. Even when you first knew me, at the time of the case you wrote about in A Study in Scarlet, I already had some work, but it was not very profitable. You can hardly understand how hard it was for me at first, and how long I had to wait before I made any progress. When I first came to London, I had rooms on Montague Street, near the British Museum. I spent a lot of free time studying all parts of science that could help me work better. Sometimes cases came to me, mainly through old student friends. At the university, people talked a lot about me and my methods. The third case was the Musgrave ritual. Because of the interest in that strange set of events and the big matters involved, I think that was the start of my rise to the position I have now. Reginald Musgrave had studied at the same college as I did, and I knew him a little. He was not very popular with the other students, but I thought that what people called pride was really his way of hiding deep shyness. He looked like a very noble man. He was thin, had a high nose and big eyes. His manners were calm but polite. He came from one of the oldest families in the country. His family branch had separated from the northern Musgraves long ago, in the 16th century. They had settled in western Sussex, where their home, the manor house of Hurlstone, is one of the oldest houses in the county. His birthplace seemed to stay with him. When I looked at his pale, sharp face and the way he held his head, I thought of old stone buildings with arches and small windows, and the old ruins of a castle. We talked sometimes, and I remember he was very interested in my ways of watching and thinking carefully. For 4 years I did not see him. Then, one morning, he came into my room on Montague Street. He had not changed much. He dressed like a young man who cared about fashion. He was a little like a dandy, and kept the calm, polite style that was his before. "How have things been with you, Musgrave?" I asked after we had warmly shaken hands. "You have probably heard about my poor father's death," he said. "He died about 2 years ago. Since then, I have had to manage the Hurlstone estates. Also, I am the Member of Parliament for my area, so my life has been busy. But I understand, Holmes, that you are now using your skills in a practical way." "Yes," I said. "I now make a living by using my mind." "I'm glad to hear that, because your advice would be very helpful to me now. Strange things have been happening at Hurlstone, and the police cannot explain them. It is a very strange and confusing case." You can imagine how eagerly I listened, Watson, because the chance I had waited for during all those months without work was now close. Deep inside, I believed I could succeed where others had failed, and now I had the chance to prove it. "Please, tell me all the details," I said. Reginald Musgrave sat opposite me and lit the cigarette I had offered him. "You should know," he said, "that even though I am single, I have to keep a large staff of servants at Hurlstone. It is a big old house and needs a lot of care. I also do preserving, and during pheasant hunting season I usually have a house full of guests. So I cannot be short of helpers. In total I have 8 maids, a cook, a butler, 2 footmen, and a boy. The garden and the stables have their own workers. Among these servants, the one who had worked here the longest was Brunton, the butler. He was a young school teacher without a job when my father hired him, but he was full of energy and strong character, and soon he became very important in the house. He is a tall, handsome man with a great forehead. Though he has worked here for 20 years, he cannot be more than 40 years old. With his good looks and many talents, He can speak several languages and play almost every musical instrument. It is surprising that he stayed so long in this job, but I guess he was comfortable and did not want to change. Everyone who visits Hurlstone always remembers its butler. But this perfect man has one problem. He is a bit of a Don Juan. You can imagine that in a quiet country place, this is not a hard role for him to play. When he was married, it was okay, but since he became a widower, he has caused many problems. A few months ago, we hoped he would settle down again because he became engaged to Rachel Howells, our second housemaid. But he left her and started seeing Janet Tregullis, the daughter of the head gamekeeper. Rachel, a very good girl but with an excitable Welsh nature, had a bad case of brain fever and walked around the house, at least until yesterday, like a shadow of her old self. That was the first drama at Hurlstone, but a second one soon came, pushing the first out of our minds. It started with the disgrace and firing of Butler Brunton. This is what happened. I have said that the man was intelligent, but this intelligence caused his downfall, because it made him too curious about things that did not concern him. I did not realize how far this would go until a small accident showed me. I said the house is very big and spread out. One day last week, on Thursday night to be exact, I could not sleep because I foolishly drank a strong black coffee after dinner. I tried to stay awake until 2 in the morning, but then I knew it was hopeless. So I got up and lit a candle to continue reading a novel. But the book was in the billiard room. I put on my robe and went to get it. To get to the billiard room, I had to go down some stairs and then cross a hallway that led to the library and the gun room. You can imagine my surprise when I looked down this hallway and saw a little light coming from the open door of the library. I had put out the lamp and closed the door before going to bed. My first thought was that burglars had come. The walls of the hall at Hurlstone have many old weapons as decorations. I took a battle axe from one of them. Then I left my candle and quietly walked down the hall on my toes to look inside the open door. The butler, Brunton, was in the library. He was sitting fully dressed in an armchair with a piece of paper, like a map, on his knee. His forehead was resting on his hand, and he looked deep in thought. I was very surprised and stayed silent, watching him from the dark. A small candle on the table gave weak light, enough to show he was fully dressed. Suddenly he stood up and walked to a bureau by the side. He unlocked it and took out a drawer. From this drawer he took a paper. He went back to his chair, put the paper by the candle and studied it carefully. I was very angry because he was looking at our family papers. I stepped forward and Brunton saw me in the doorway. He quickly stood up, his face very pale with fear. He put the paper he was looking at into his shirt. "So," I said, "this is how you repay the trust we gave you. You will leave my service tomorrow." He bowed his head like a man who was completely broken and quietly walked past me without saying a word. The candle was still on the table. By its light, I looked at the paper Brunton had taken from the bureau. To my surprise, it was not important at all. It was just a copy of the questions and answers from an old family ceremony called the Musgrave ritual. This ceremony is special to our family. Every Musgrave has done it for many centuries when they come of age. It is interesting to us and maybe to archaeologists because of our family history and symbols, but it has no real use. "We should look at that paper again later," I said. "If you really think it is necessary," he answered slowly. To continue, I locked the bureau again with the key Brunton left. I was turning to leave when I was surprised to see the butler had come back and was standing before me. "Mr. Musgrave, sir," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "I cannot bear disgrace, sir. I have always been proud, even though my position is low. Disgrace would destroy me. My blood will be on your head, sir, truly, if you force me to despair. If you cannot keep me after this, then please let me give you 1 month's notice and leave by my own choice. I could accept that, Mr. Musgrave, but not to be thrown out in front of all the people I know so well. You don't deserve much respect, Brunton, I said. Your behavior has been very bad, but because you have worked here a long time, I do not want to make a public scandal. Still, a month is too long. Leave in 1 week, and say whatever reason you want for going. 1 week only, sir, he said sadly. 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks. 1 week, I said again, and you should think I am being very kind. He walked away, his head down like a broken man. I put out the light and went back to my room. For 2 days after this, Brunton worked very hard and did his duties well. I did not talk about what happened, and I waited to see how he would handle his shame. But on the 3rd morning he did not come after breakfast to get my orders for the day, as he usually did. When I left the dining room I met Rachel Howells, the maid. I told you she had recently been sick and looked very pale and weak. I told her she should rest. You should be in bed, I said. Come back to work when you feel stronger. She looked at me strangely, and I thought maybe her mind was not well. I am strong enough, Mr. Musgrave, she said. We will see what the doctor says, I answered. You must stop work now, and when you go downstairs, tell them I want to see Brunton. The butler has gone, she said. Gone? Gone where? He's gone. No one has seen him. He's not in his room. Oh, yes, he's gone. She fell back against the wall, laughing and crying at the same time. I was shocked by her sudden strange behavior and quickly rang the bell to get help. The girl was taken to her room, still screaming and crying. I started asking about Brunton. It was clear that he had disappeared. His bed was not used, and no one had seen him since he went to his room the night before. But it was hard to understand how he could have left the house, because all the windows and doors were locked in the morning. His clothes, watch, and money were in his room. But the black suit he usually wore was missing. His slippers were gone too, but his boots were still there. So where could Brunton have gone during the night, and what had happened to him now? Of course, we searched the whole house, from the cellar to the attic, but found no sign of him. As I said, the house is like a maze, especially the old part, which almost no one lives in now. We looked through every room and cellar but found nothing. It was hard to believe he had left without taking his things. But where could he be? I asked the local police for help, but they did not find anything. It had rained the night before, and we checked the lawn and paths around the house, but there were no clues. Things were like this when a new event made us forget the first mystery for a while. For 2 days, Rachel Howells had been very ill. Sometimes she was confused and sometimes she was very upset. Because of this, a nurse was hired to stay with her at night. On the 3rd night after Brunton disappeared, the nurse was sitting in a chair and had fallen asleep when her patient was sleeping well. But in the early morning the nurse woke up and saw the bed was empty, the window was open, and Rachel was gone. I was immediately worried. I went with 2 footmen to look for Rachel. It was easy to see where she went because her footprints started under the window. We followed them across the grass to the edge of the lake. The footprints stopped near the gravel path outside the garden. The lake was 8 feet deep. You can imagine how we felt when we saw the footprints ended there. We quickly used tools to try to find her body in the lake, but we found nothing. Instead, we found something strange. It was a cloth bag with old rusty and dirty pieces of metal and some dull stones or glass inside. This was the only thing we found in the lake. Although we searched carefully and asked many people, we do not know what happened to Rachel Howells or Richard Brunton. The county police do not know what to do next, so I have come to you as the last hope." You can imagine, Watson, how eagerly I listened to this strange series of events. I tried to put them together and find a common connection that linked them all. The butler was gone. The maid was gone. The maid had loved the butler, but later had reasons to hate him. She was Welsh, passionate and fiery. She was very upset right after the butler disappeared. She had thrown a bag with strange things into the lake. All these facts were important, but none explained the real problem. What was the beginning of this whole situation? That was the end of this confusing story. "I must see that paper, Musgrave," I said. "The one your butler looked at, even though it might cost him his job." Musgrave answered, "Our ritual is a bit strange, but it is old, and that makes it acceptable. I have a copy of the questions and answers if you want to look at them." He gave me the paper, Watson. It is the strange list of questions and answers that every Musgrave must answer when he becomes an adult. I will read the questions and answers to you now. Whose was it? It belonged to the man who is gone. Who will have it? The one who will come. Where was the sun? Over the oak tree. Where was the shadow? Under the elm tree. How was it measured? North by 10 steps and then another 10, east by 5 steps and another 5, south by 2 steps and another 2, west by 1 step and another 1, and then under. What will we give for it? Everything we have. Why should we give it? Because of the trust. The original paper has no date, but the spelling shows it is from the middle of the 17th century, said Musgrave. But I am afraid it will not help much to solve this mystery. At least, I said, it gives us another mystery, and this one is even more interesting than the first. It might be that solving one will help solve the other. Excuse me, Musgrave, but your butler seems to me to have been very clever and had more understanding than 10 generations of his masters. I don't quite understand you, said Musgrave. The paper seems not very important for practical use. But to me it seems very important, and I think Brunton felt the same. He probably saw it before that night when you caught him. That is possible. We did not try to hide it. I believe he just wanted to remember it better that night. He had a kind of map or chart that he was looking at with the paper, and he put it in his pocket when you came. That is true, but what does this old family custom have to do with him, and what does this strange paper mean? I think we can find out easily, I said. If you agree, we will take the first train to Sussex and study it more carefully there. That same afternoon we both arrived at Hurlstone. You may have seen pictures or read about this famous old buildings, so I will only say it is shaped like an L. The long part is newer, and the short part is the old centre from which the rest grew. Above the low, heavy door in the old part is the year 1607 carved in the stone, but experts agree that the wood and stone are much older than that. The thick walls and small windows of this old part made the family build the new wing last century. Now the old part is used as a store and cellar when it is used at all. A large park with old trees is around the house. The lake my client mentioned is near the avenue, about 200 yards from the building. I was already sure, Watson, that there were not 3 different mysteries here, but only one. If I could understand the Musgrave ritual correctly, I would find the clue that would show me the truth about both the butler Brunton and the maid Howells. So I focused all my energy on that. Why was the servant so eager to learn this old ritual? Clearly, because he saw something in it that all the past country owners had missed, and he hoped to get some personal benefit. But what was it, and how did it change his fate? When I read the ritual, it was clear to me that the measurements meant a certain place mentioned in the document. If we found that place, we might find the secret that the old Musgrave family wanted to keep safe in such a strange way. The paper gave us two guides to start with, an oak tree and an elm tree. There was no doubt about the oak. Right in front of the house, on the left side of the road, there was a huge oak tree, one of the most beautiful I have ever seen. That tree was there when your ritual was made, I said as we drove by it. It was probably there at the time of the Norman conquest, he answered. It is 23 feet around. Do you have any old elm trees? I asked. There used to be a very old elm over there, but it was struck by lightning 10 years ago, and we cut down the stump. Can you see where it used to be? Oh, yes. Are there no other elms? No old ones, but many beeches. I would like to see where it grew. We drove up in a dog cart, and my client took me straight to the place on the lawn where the elm had been. It was almost halfway between the oak and the house. My investigation was moving forward. I guess it is impossible to know how tall the elm was, I said. I can tell you now, it was 64 feet. How do you know that? I asked, surprised. When my old teacher gave me trigonometry exercises, they were always about measuring heights. When I was a boy, I worked out the height of every tree and building on the estate. This was good luck. The information came faster than I hoped. Tell me, I asked, did your butler ever ask you about that? Reginald Musgrave looked surprised. Now that you mention it, he said, Brunton asked me about the height of the tree months ago because of an argument with the groom. This was very good news, Watson, because it showed I was on the right path. I looked at the sun. It was low in the sky, and I worked out that in less than an hour it would be just above the top branches of the old oak. Then one rule from the ritual would be true. The shadow of the elm must mean the far end of the shadow, or else the trunk would be the mark. So I had to find where the far end of the shadow would be when the sun was just past the oak. That must have been hard, Holmes, since the elm was not there anymore. Well, at least I knew that if Brunton could do it, I could too. Also, it was not really difficult. I went with Musgrave to his study and carved this peg, tying a long string to it with a knot every yard. When I took two parts of a fishing rod that together were 6 feet, touching the top of the oak, I stood the rod upright, pointed out the shadow's direction, and measured it. It was 9 feet long. Now the math was easy. If a 6-foot rod made a 9-foot shadow, then a 64-foot tree would make a 96-foot shadow. Both lines would be the same. I measured the distance, which took me almost to the house's wall. I pushed a peg into the ground there. You can imagine how happy I was, Watson, when I saw a cone-shaped hole on the ground less than 2 inches from my peg. I knew it was the mark Brunton made, and that I was still following his trail. From this point, I started to walk the steps, first finding the main directions with my pocket compass. 10 steps with each foot took me along parallel to the house's wall, and I put a peg there. Then I carefully walked 5 steps east and 2 steps south. That brought me to the old door's very edge. 2 steps west meant I had to go 2 steps down the stone floor passage, and this was the place the ritual showed. Never before have I felt such a cold and deep disappointment, Watson. For a moment I thought there must be a big mistake in my calculations. The setting sun shone fully on the passage floor, and I saw that the old grey stones, worn down by many feet, were firmly fixed together and had not been moved for many years. Brunton had not worked there. I tapped on the floor, but it sounded the same everywhere. There was no sign of any crack or hole, but luckily Musgrave, who was starting to understand what I was doing and was as excited as I was, took out his paper to check my calculations. "And under," he said. "You forgot the and under. I had thought it meant we had to dig, but now I saw I was wrong." "There is a cellar under this place?" I asked. "Yes, and it is as old as the house. Down here, through this door." We went down a curved stone stair. Musgrave lit a big lantern that was on a barrel in the corner. At once it was clear that we had found the real place and that other people had recently been here. It had been used to store wood. The wood logs, which had been spread all over the floor, were now stacked on the sides, leaving a clear space in the middle. In that space lay a large heavy stone slab with a rusted iron ring in the centre. A thick shepherd's check scarf was tied to the ring. "By Jove!" cried Musgrave. "That is Brunton's scarf. I have seen him wear it and could recognize it anywhere. What has the villain been doing here?" At my suggestion, 2 county police officers were called to be present. I tried to lift the stone by pulling the scarf. I could only move it a little. With the help of one of the officers, I finally managed to carry the stone to one side. Underneath was a dark hole, and we all looked down into it. Musgrave kneeled next to the hole and lowered the lantern. We saw a small chamber about 7 feet deep and 4 feet wide. On one side was a short wooden box with brass edges. The lid was open and an old-fashioned key stuck out of the lock. The box was covered with thick dust on the outside. Dampness and worms had eaten through the wood, and there were strange pale fungi growing inside. There were several metal discs, old coins like the ones I have here, scattered at the bottom. The box had nothing else inside. At that moment we did not pay attention to the old box because our eyes were fixed on what was next to it. It was the body of a man in a black suit. He was sitting on his heels with his forehead resting on the edge of the box and his arms stretched out on each side. I admit, Watson, that I had been disappointed in my investigation so far. I thought I would solve the case when I found the place mentioned in the ritual, but now that I was there, I was still far from knowing what the family had hidden with such care. It is true that I found what happened to Brunton, but I still needed to learn how it happened and what part the missing woman had in it. I sat down on a barrel in the corner and thought carefully about everything. You know my method in such cases, Watson. I put myself in the man's place and, after judging his intelligence, try to imagine what I would do in the same situation. In this case, it was easier because Brunton was very clever, so I did not need to change my thoughts because of his personal character, as astronomers call it. He knew that something valuable was hidden. He found the place, he saw the stone covering it was too heavy for one man to move alone. What would he do next? He could not get help from outside, even if there was someone he trusted, because opening doors would risk being caught. It was better to have help inside the house. But whom could he ask? This girl had loved him. A man always finds it hard to accept that he may have lost a woman's love, even if he treated her badly. He would try to make peace with the girl Howells by being kind, then ask her to help him. Together they would come at night to the cellar, and their combined strength would be enough to move the stone. So far I could follow their actions as if I had seen them myself. But for 2 of them, and one was a woman, lifting that heavy stone must have been hard work. A strong Sussex policeman and I found it difficult to move. What would they use to help? Probably what I would have used myself. I stood up and looked carefully at the pieces of wood lying around the floor. Almost at once I found what I was looking for. One piece, about 3 feet long, had a clear mark at one end. Several other pieces were flat on the sides, as if something heavy had pressed on them. It was clear that when they pulled the stone up, they put the wood pieces into the crack. When the opening was big enough for a person to crawl through, they held it open by placing a long piece of wood across it. This wood piece would have a mark at the lower end because the stone's full weight pressed down on it. So far my ideas were still correct. Now, how could I imagine what happened at midnight? Clearly, only one person could fit into the hole, and that was Brunton. The girl must have waited above. Brunton opened the box and probably handed the things inside up, since they were missing now. And then what happened? What burning fire of revenge suddenly grew strong in this passionate Celtic woman's heart when she saw the man who had hurt her maybe more than we thought, was in her control? Was it a mistake that the wood had moved, and that the stone had closed Brunton inside what had become his grave? Had she only kept silent about what happened to him? Or had she quickly pushed the support away and made the stone fall into place? Whatever the truth was, I could still imagine the woman holding her treasure tightly and running quickly up the winding stairs, with her ears maybe hearing the quiet screams behind her and the loud noise of angry hands hitting the stone slab that was killing her unfaithful lover. This was the reason for her pale face, her shaking nerves, and her strange loud laughter the next morning. But what was inside the box? What did she do with it? Of course, it must have been the old metal and stones that my client had taken from the lake. She had thrown them there as soon as she could to hide the last proof of her crime. For 20 minutes I sat still, thinking carefully about it. Musgrave was still standing with a very pale face, moving his lantern and looking down into the hole. "These are coins from Charles I," he said, showing the few coins that were in the box. "You see, we were right about the time of the ritual." "We might find more things from Charles I," I said loudly, as I suddenly understood what the first two questions of the ritual probably meant. "Let me see what is inside the bag you took from the lake." We went up to his study, and he put the broken pieces in front of me. When I looked at them, I could see why he thought they were not important, because the metal was almost black and the stones looked dull without shine. But I rubbed one stone on my sleeve, and later it shined like a small light in the dark hollow of my hand. The metal was made in the shape of a double ring, but it was bent and twisted, not like it was first made. "You must remember," I said, "that the royal group stayed in England even after the king died, and when they finally ran away, they probably left many of their most valuable things buried behind, planning to come back and get them when the times were safer. My ancestor, Sir Ralph Musgrave, was an important cavalier and the main helper of Charles II during his travels," my friend said. "Oh, really?" I answered. "Well, I think this now gives us the last part we needed. I must say congratulations for having this relic, even though it came to you in a sad way. It has great value by itself, but it is even more important as a historical curiosity." "What is it then?" he asked, very surprised. "It is nothing less than the old crown of the kings of England." "The crown?" "Yes, exactly. Think about what the ritual says. How does it go? Whose was it? His who is gone. That meant after Charles was executed. Then, who will have it? He who will come. That meant Charles II, who everyone knew was coming. I think there is no doubt that this broken and strange-shaped crown once was worn by the royal Stuarts. But how did it get into the pond? Oh, that question will take some time to answer." Then I told him the long story of guesses and proofs that I had made. The night had come, and the moon was shining bright in the sky before I finished my story. "So why did Charles not get his crown when he came back?" asked Musgrave, putting the old crown back into its linen bag. "Oh, there you touch the one thing we will probably never understand. It is likely that the Musgrave who knew the secret died during that time, and by mistake left this guide to his son without telling him what it meant. From that day until now, it has been passed from father to son until finally it reached the man who found the secret but lost his life trying to get it. And that is the story of the Musgrave ritual, Watson. They have the crown at Hurlstone, although they had some legal problems and had to pay a lot of money before they could keep it. I'm sure if you say my name, they will be happy to show it to you. No one ever heard about the woman again, and most likely she escaped from England and took herself and the memory of her crime to a faraway land across the sea.